Much of the way downtown Tiburon looks today is a direct result of the establishment of a railroad terminus here in the late 1880s. From the Shoreline Park and Main Street to the bike path that leads to town, the footprint of that original industrial enterprise remains. When John Reed was granted the 5,000 acres of the Rancho Corte del Presidio in 1834 by the Mexican government, what is now the town of Tiburon was more water than land. Corinthian Island was indeed an island, and the whole of downtown was awash. 40 years later, the California gold rush had totally transformed the San Francisco Bay Area. Not only had the population exploded, but the silty runoff from the gold mining had begun filling up many of the shallow areas of the bay, including Tiburon. However, the Tiburon Peninsula was only sparsely inhabited. The only activities were the Reed and Lyford dairies, several brick kilns, a cod fishery, and an explosives factory. Everything changed when the railroad magnate Peter Donahue decided that Point Tiburon would be the perfect place for a ferry terminal to connect to his San Francisco and North Pacific Railroad lines, which ran up through Marin and Sonoma counties. In 1870, he had established a ferry connection to San Francisco for his Sonoma lines at a new town on the Petaluma River, named for himself. Although the town of Donahue grew into a bustling community with machine shops, warehouses, a hotel, and many residences, the long ferry ride was never very popular. When the competing North Pacific Coast Railroad started building a line to Sausalito, it was time for Peter Donahue to make the move south. In 1882, he created the San Francisco and San Rafael Railroad to connect his new terminal in the Marin capital to Point Tiburon. To make way for his new rail yard, Donahue had to turn the bluff point and adjacent marshes into a plateau. He did so in record time with a new machine called the steam shovel, and had crews working around the clock, creating the flat land that we now know. This photo from about 1883, a year into the work at Point Tiburon, shows what the Marin Journal reported in November of that year. This point has made a grand advance. The waterfront has a fine ferry slip, long wharf, tracks, a depot, machine shops, a store, boarding houses, etc., part of which have already been built, and all of which will be by spring. To bring a rail line from San Rafael to Tiburon, Donahue would spend nearly $700,000, because the line needed 3 tunnels, extensive low trestles over marshes, and a dramatic high trestle at Trestle Glen. The railroad first went through the 1,000-foot Cal Park Tunnel, coming out at what is now Larkspur Landing, where it crossed the Corte Madera Creek via a 90-foot drawbridge. The track then crossed over marshland on a low trestle before reaching solid ground near today's village at Corte Madera Shopping Center. A second tunnel of 1,900 feet went through the base of Ring Mountain, parallel to what is now Highway 101. The rails emerged into daylight close to the site of Kol Shafar Synagogue before hooking east past the new Reed Station and along the pastures of the Big Reed Dairy Ranch, which is now where Bel Air School is. A final 600-foot tunnel came out above the site of today's Belvedere-Tiburon and launched onto a massive trestle which crossed the marshlands which we now call Blackie's Pasture. The last 2.5 miles were an easy run along the picturesque Richardson's Bay, nearly all of which was made into the multi-use path in 1970. The final section was carried on a low trestle over the edge of Tiburon Lagoon. The last vestige of this lagoon is the small marsh and pond behind Town Hall. It didn't take long for Tiburon to prosper and grow. By the early 1890s, as this fine panorama shows, the train yards and Main Street are well established, with many of the buildings seen here actually barged down from the abandoned town of Donahue, including the large Sonoma House Hotel on the corner of Main Street, and the 4 matching 12-room boarding houses along the lagoon. For the next 60 years, the railroad defined the character of Tiburon, a bustling, hard-working community built on one of America's greatest industries.